Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. Memorial Day weekend is the traditional start to summer in the United States. I remember growing up that, like clockwork, it would get hot on Memorial Day weekend. But this year, with Joe Biden in the White House, Washington, D.C. is having their coldest Memorial Day weekend on record by a wide margin. This graph shows May 29 through 30 daily maximum temperatures at Laurel, Maryland, going back to the beginning of the 20th century. Laurel is located just north of Washington, D.C. The average temperature at Laurel on these dates is 78 degrees, with the previous record cold being 63 degrees. This year, the average temperature will be 53 degrees, which is 10 degrees below the previous record, and 25 degrees below normal. Apparently, Joe Biden has healed the climate, at least if you like cold weather. Here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, it's very cold, and we were driving around this afternoon with the heat on in the car. But 49 years ago this weekend, I remember being extremely hot. We traveled to a congressional hearing in Kanab, Utah, to testify in support of a wilderness area. It was an extremely hot day. 7 congressmen, more than 70 witnesses, and 350 supporters packed the sweltering Kanab High School gymnasium. The van we were driving in was overheating, and we had to push it up big hills on the Navajo reservation with the air conditioning turned off to keep the engine from burning up. I was 15 years old at the time, and it all seemed like great fun. This was a few days before the Watergate break-in story broke in the press. And it was a few weeks before I played golf with Gene Roddenberry in Aspen, Colorado. That was a pretty fun summer for me. But the cold weather this year really has nothing to do with Joe Biden. May afternoon temperatures have been declining in the United States since the end of the 19th century, with 1934 being by far the hottest year. This graph shows the average May first day above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which has been getting progressively later since the 19th century. And the May percent of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit has dropped off quite a bit over the last 110 years, with the 2 hottest years being 1934 and 1911. The last 3 years and 6 of the last 7 years have been among the coolest on record. The percent of U.S. stations reaching 90 degrees Fahrenheit sometime during the month of May has dropped off rather sharply since the end of the 19th century. And once again, the 2 hottest years were 1934 and 1911. This is from the Boston Globe, May 23, 1911. It was 104 degrees in New Hampshire and 103 degrees in Maine. Temperatures like that don't occur anymore in July, much less in May. The heat was killing babies, 24 dead in the last 4 days just in Cleveland. The Sydney Morning Herald reported on May 22, 1911, the terrific heat wave that is sweeping over the United States has been responsible for hundreds of deaths. May 1911 was extremely hot, but May 1934 was even hotter. On May 30, 1934, it was 111 degrees in North Dakota, 110 in South Dakota, 109 in Iowa, 107 in Nebraska, 107 in Texas, 106 in Colorado and Minnesota, 105 in Missouri, 104 in Kansas, 103 in Oklahoma, 101 in Arkansas, 101 in Wisconsin, and 100 degrees in Illinois. Nebraska newspapers reported that it was 110 degrees in Nebraska as well. Forecast maximum temperatures in Nebraska tomorrow are about 50 degrees cooler than they were on the same date in 1934. The heat in May 1934 was unprecedented, and so was the drought. About 80% of the United States was in drought, much of which was in extreme drought. And the drought wasn't just in the United States. According to the chief meteorologist at the U.S. Weather Bureau, the drought was worldwide. He said, "What is wrong with the world's weather? It's a question I've been asked many times in the last few weeks." There was a worldwide drought and glaciers were disappearing. Farmers were suffering ruinous losses around the world, almost universal disaster. Europe thought they could end the drought via pagan rituals, so basically nothing's changed there since 1934. Now they believe they can prevent droughts by building windmills and driving electric cars. That has as much chance of success as do the pagan rituals. As I've already mentioned, May 1934 was the hottest on record in the United States, and the following year in 1935 was the coolest May in the past century. The cold in May 1935 was associated with some very extreme weather. On May 31st, 1935, Texas set the world's record rainfall of 22 inches in 2 hours and 45 minutes. That broke the world's record, which was set in Colorado a few hours earlier. On May 30th, 1935, 2 locations in Colorado received 24 inches of rain in 6 hours. The rain in Colorado led to the worst flood in Nebraska history, which killed hundreds of people. And meanwhile, in India, they were having unprecedented heat. India reached 124 degrees. Record heat in India and record cold and rain in the United States 1 year after the worst drought in history. A few weeks before the flooding in Texas, they were having historical dust storms. And then a few weeks later came the most intense hurricane in U.S. history, after the coldest May on record. There were tornadoes, floods, and hurricanes killing people all over the world that summer. And all of this record severe weather was occurring with very low levels of carbon dioxide. But this week, the National Post in Canada says that global warming is causing people to commit suicide. They say that fiercer heat waves are causing people to kill themselves. But as is normally the case, there's no truth to what they're saying. Deaths from all types of natural disasters, including extreme temperature, are down 80% over the last century. Fatality rates in the United States due to weather events has plummeted since the beginning of the 20th century. Fatality rates due to weather are now at record lows. But it wasn't always like this. Remember the record heat of May 1911? Well, that was just the beginning of the heat wave. Another heat wave during July 1911 killed thousands of people in New England and sent many over the brink of madness. During 11 hellish days, horses dropped in the street and babies didn't wake from their naps. Tar in the streets bubbled like hot syrup. Trees shed their leaves, grass turned to dust, and cow's milk started to dry up. In every major northeastern city, the sweltering heat drove people to suicide. On July 4th, 1911, temperatures hit 103 in Portland, Maine, 104 in Boston, 105 in Vernon, Vermont, and 106 in Nashua, New Hampshire. At least 200 people died from drowning trying to cool off in rivers, lakes, ponds, and the ocean, anything wet. Still more died from heat stroke. The 1911 heat wave was possibly the worst weather disaster in New England history, with estimates of the death toll as high as 2,000. July 4th, 1911 was the hottest July 4th on record in the United States. Suicides and deaths were reported in many U.S. cities. Thermometers burst under excessive strain in the heat. All of the pink dots on this map show where it was over 100 degrees on July 4th, 1911. Heat like this is incomprehensible in the United States now. And on the other side of the pond, the heat was just as bad. More than 40,000 people died in Paris during the heat wave of 1911. Most of the dead were babies. Temperatures in London reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit during August 1911. And this wasn't a fake temperature taken on the tarmac at Heathrow Airport. This was the official temperature at Greenwich. In Germany, more than 1,000 people died during the 1911 heat wave. The National Post claims that fiercer heat waves are driving people to suicide, but this is complete nonsense. Heat waves in Toronto are no worse than they were during the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s, with the hottest summer being 1949. Temperatures in Toronto are just now getting back to where they were 70 years ago. In the United States, the percent of stations reaching 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius sometime during the year has plummeted over the last century. And this cooling has occurred even as carbon dioxide levels have increased. The percentage of hot days in the United States has also plummeted over the last century even as CO2 has increased. There's no correlation between heat waves and the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Claims to the contrary are junk science and superstition. The National Post is simply making things up, and so is the Biden administration. Joe Biden has been in Washington, D.C. for almost 50 years, and carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have steadily increased. There's been dozens of international climate agreements, and they've done nothing to slow the rise of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. These are simply for show. Government doesn't control carbon dioxide, and it doesn't control the climate. CO2 levels have reached a record high under Joe Biden, and this is going to continue unless the Biden administration starts tampering with this data set as well. The Biden administration is already tampering with most of the other climate data sets, so it wouldn't be at all surprising to see them start tampering with this one too. The only thing which the Biden administration is accomplishing with their climate virtue signaling is making energy prices skyrocket. The last time when gasoline prices averaged over $3 a gallon in the United States was 7 years ago, when Joe Biden was also in the White House. Pretty much everything we hear from the press and politicians now has no basis in reality. We live in a world driven by propaganda, junk science, misinformation, and superstition. One of the main reasons why people don't die from heat and cold anymore is because we have fossil fuels, which provide us with air conditioning and central heating. When the Biden administration shuts down our reliable supply of energy, we're going to see a lot more weather-related deaths. We had a preview of this in Texas this year when dozens of people died because they couldn't get access to electricity or natural gas. Texas made the mistake of becoming too reliant on wind power, which is inherently not reliable. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on this madness for the past 13 years. You can visit him and Kyrie on the web at realclimatescience.com.